We continue with Josephus, the life of Josephus. Now, when I first read about Josephus many, many years ago, people would refer to that his life seemed to be made up of remarkable escapes. Mm-hmm. I knew of two of them, one in which everybody else died before him, and the one that we learned about already in his trip to Rome. But literally every chapter I read now, he's getting out by the skin of his teeth. Mm-hmm. Right? If you remember, in the last one, he was surrounded by enemies of Rome, zealous enemies of Rome, and he barely escaped and jumped into a boat, ran down to shore, jumped into a boat, and went out into the middle of the Sea of Galilee. Mm-hmm. And he made his way to what he thought, I guess, was going to be a friendlier place, which is Sepphoris. Sepphoris was a place that, a city, I think we have it right here. Yeah. This is, again, the Galilee, and Sepphoris is here. We're going to refer to Ptolemais here in a second. And this was a city that had remained loyal to the Romans. So it was the opposite of the previous city that he'd been in, right? So he says, I came to Sepphoris, but the inhabitants of this city, having determined to continue with their allegiance to the Romans, were afraid of my coming to them. Because to the people of Sepphoris, he seems like a zealot, and he's just going to bring problems for the Romans to them, right? Whereas at the other place, he seemed like a Roman sympathizer, mm-hmm. right? And so he's having a lot of problems. They were afraid my coming to them would bring the Romans, and they tried by putting me upon another action to divert me. They were trying to get him to go somewhere else, and they might be freed from the terror that they were in.
From the terror?
Yeah, they were terrified that the Romans were going to come marching on their city.
But they were loyal to Romans.
In order to kill Josephus, who was allied with the Judeans, with the Galileans, and might have been perceived by the Romans as a zealot. So they were very nervous, right? You can see it's a tense time.
Because what if he goes into hiding in the city somewhere, and they can't find him? The Romans think, oh, you're hiding him, you know.
Yeah. Exactly.
A lot of possibilities.
That's right. You know, and he was a heroic Jew at this point, right? Remember that. That's, you know, he was sent from Jerusalem, remember? He sent from Jerusalem in order to organize the defense of the Galilee, right? So if he's in their city, then the Romans will draw a conclusion that our city has gone over to the Zealots, and they'll come and massacre the people in our city. So please leave the city. So they tried to divert his attention, you know, go hunting, go daven somewhere else, whatever, find another shul, you know, just don't hang out here, right? But that didn't work. He was planning to stay, right? So accordingly, they sent to Jesus, the captain of those robbers. Now, one thing about the word Jesus, there are roughly 22 different Jesuses mentioned in the story of Josephus. There were a number of them. There were a variant on the name Joshua as well. So this was not the one that is most famous, right? But you should know that one of the issues which we have to deal with is that Josephus really is preserved more by the Holy Roman Empire and Christianity than by anything else, right? And it seems there are some references to...
Preserved even his work. His
work, right? And considered to be a very important history by Christianity, right? It's very questionable for us, and we see why, right? But for the Holy Roman Empire and for the Christians that became part of the Holy Roman Empire, Josephus was a principal book and a great authority, right? And it seems that references to the most famous Jesus may have very well been added to the writings of Josephus by people who copied the book,
because
which was not uncommon.
When Josephus was alive.
That's exactly right. There were many people who were alive at the time that Josephus's life. Josephus is born after the death of Jesus, but of course there are many people who were alive during Josephus's life and Jesus' life who could have witnessed to him what Jesus had been like, in the previous generation. That's all. But it's clear that there's no possibility that he actually had first-hand knowledge of Jesus, and it's very likely that if he made any references to them at all, they were kind of sketchy and they were filled in by people who made copies
but are they
of the
in
book.
That book?
Yeah.
Oh, so but he did.
They're in the.
Those references. Does he refer to them as him being alive? Does it?
No. He refers to him as having passed away, right?
Okay,
and as a great rabbi. We'll see. We're going to come to it. But it seems there are some things that are uncharacteristic of Josephus that periodically enter the book. And since we understand that it's very much part of the Christian theology, that this book, and part of the proofs of Christianity, and a history of the destruction of the end of the Jewish and the scattering of the Jews, that there's a lot of reasons that historians believe that these references were not actually written by Josephus. But we'll come to that in more detail when we get to their own words, but you're going to see a couple things coming up soon. But this Jesus we're referring to as the captain of those robbers is not related in any way except a similar name. Right? So it says that the people of Sepphoris, right, they sent for Jesus, the captain of those robbers who were in the confines of Ptolemais. Ptolemais is quite close, right? Ptolemais is here, right? And Sepphoris is here, right? And what was their purpose? They promised to give him a great deal of money if he would come with the forces he had with him, which were in numbers 800, and fight against us. Meaning,
the 800.
He was bringing. Jesus was being hired to bring 800 armed men to attack Josephus. Right, and to get him out of Sepphoris.
Quite a few people.
Yeah, it is. Right.
Basically.
Now, keep in mind always, this is Josephus talking. Right?
Yeah.
The fish was this big that got away, right?
You're saying he's always saving or escaping, and it's like he's a hero in every story.
Listen to what happens here. Accordingly, he complied with what they had desired upon the promises that they had made him, and wanted to fall upon us when we were unprepared for him, and know nothing of his coming beforehand. So he sent to me, and desired that I would give him leave to come and salute me. Jesus said, I'm coming, right? And I just want to pay you some honor. I want to pay you some honor, right? When I had given him that leave, doesn't this sound like the previous story, remember? Right? John of Gascala came, he wanted to stay overnight. Right? Okay. When I had given him that leave, which I did without the least knowledge of his treacherous intentions beforehand. Again, he only sees the good in people, and he's so surprised when they have bad intentions. He took his band of robbers, and hurried to come to me. Yet did not this his knavery, it's an Old English word. A knave is a scoundrel. His knavery succeed. For as he was already nearly approaching, one of those with him deserted him and came to me and told me what he had undertaken to do. When I was informed of this, I went into the marketplace and pretended to know nothing of his treacherous purpose. I took with me many Galileans that were armed, as well as some of those from Tiberias. And when I had given orders that all the roads should be carefully guarded, I charged the keepers of the town gates to give admittance to none but Jesus. Right? Let him in. Right? But only him. Not the other 799 people with him. Right? To give admittance to all none but Jesus, when he came with the leaders of his men. and to exclude the rest. And in case they aim to force themselves in, to use stripes in order to repel them. You're wondering what stripes are? If you look over my shoulder, those are stripes there, right? They're a kind of whip with stones built into it. And they also had a very long version of this that was like a bolero, I think it's called.
Is that
What they were using it?
that
Is this what they used according to Jewish law when they exercised
also?
lashes?
That's right.
What they used?
Yeah, that it could be. This could be used.
Or,
Yeah, but it wasn't with this many stones. But it did have things at the end that cut. Yeah,
It's a whip.
but it's a whip. It's a relatively short whip, right? But it'll break your legs, right? It's not just leather. Has a lot of weight to it, right? They also had another version of this called stripes, which was something that you would throw. And I think in Venezuela, the bolero, they have it, where you can throw it and it wraps itself like a snake around the leg, right? And holds you too. So they were ordered to use these things to prevent the additional forces of Jesus, if it was required, from entering into the town, into the gates, right? So I ordered and to use stripes in order to repel them. Accordingly, those that had received such a charge did as they were bidden. And Jesus came in with a few others, and when I had ordered him to throw down his arms immediately and told him that if he refused to do so, he was a dead man. It sounds like the West. Drop your guns or you're a dead man. Right? He, seeing armed men standing all around him, was terrified and complied. And as for those of his followers that were excluded, when they were informed that he was seized, they ran away. I then called Jesus to me by himself and told him that I was not a stranger to the treacherous design he had against me, nor was I ignorant by whom he was sent for. That, however, I would forgive him what he had done already, if he would repent of it and be faithful to me hereafter. Switch sides.
Who sent him?
People of Sepphoris, it seems like. And thus, upon his promise to do all that I had desired, I let him go, and gave him leave to get those whom he had formerly had with him together again. But I threatened the inhabitants of Sepphoris that if they would not leave off their ungrateful treatment of me, I would punish them sufficiently. So he's let the people of Sepphoris know, I know what you're up to. I've disarmed your assassin you sent, and he's on my side now. Right? So you have a choice.
How come people at the gates of Sephora was listening to him?
No, weren't the people of Sepphoris that were listening to him. He had taken over the defense of the town with his Galileans. He had come with troops. He wasn't by himself.
Josephus came.
Yeah, Josephus arrived in Sepphoris with an armed troop.
But how many?
Right.
Like, not as many as... How many did you...
Not as many as the 800. I think it was like 200 that he arrived.
So, I can see why they'd be more afraid.
Right. But it was enough so that he could defend the town, prevent the 800 from entering. They didn't know how many were inside, and enough to threaten their leader. Right? Josephus would have killed him otherwise. As you'll see. Right. Now this is very important because this may be one of the elements that was added. Listen carefully. At this time, we're moving forward now. This is after the incident. He's still in Sepphoris. At this time, it was the two great men who were under the jurisdiction of King Agrippa. Now, King Agrippa was really a servant of Rome at this point. He was not really a leader of the Jewish people in the sense. He was a puppet of Rome. But by the way, Josephus was loyal to Agrippa as well. Under the jurisdiction of King Agrippa, came to me out of the region of Traitor, which is north of Sepphoris, bringing their horses and their arms, and carrying with them their money also. And when the Jews would force them to be circumcised, if they would stay among them, I would not permit them to have any force upon them. So these are two non-Jews who were seeking protection from Josephus, right, in a Jewish city. And when it uses the phrase, I would want to stay among them, it doesn't mean just visit the city. It's a reference to Jewish women as well. And the people of the city said, you can't be near Jewish women if you're not circumcised. It's out of the question. And they wanted to seize them and to circumcise them. I would not permit them to have any force upon them, but said to them, everyone ought to worship God according to his own inclinations and not to be constrained by force. Now this is not a Jewish belief at all. At this time, whatever, you see as the good way to worship God is fine. Now, Josephus had visited a number of other denominations. Remember, at the beginning of his life, he was with the Essenes, and he was with the Sadducees, and he was with the Pharisees, and even spent some time among the Zealots. And they all had different views of the afterlife, and they had a number of different views. And he doesn't seem to put them down, except he doesn't like the way they behave sometimes, and he chose the Pharisees. But here we're talking about somebody who lives in Israel and is not Jewish.
Right? And they're not following Jewish religious practices? Or
that's right. They're not. No, they're not.
Is it?
They seem to worship God. It's a little unclear what that means at this moment in the description. But his statement here, everyone ought to worship God according to his own inclination and not be constrained by force, may very well be one of those additions.
But,
because there's a reference that Josephus in some Christian theology became the first bishop of Jerusalem.
But don't proselytize.
But
we don't force people to follow Hashem. Like by physical force.
Well, first of all, the rules of life in Israel are different than the rules of life outside, particularly this time when they're threatened by the Romans, right? There's a lot of threatening going on at this point, and if they were going to be seeking protection in a city, and they were intending to have relations with Jewish women, it would not be appropriate. And he, a Kohen, seems to think that it's okay to worship God any way you want, right? Which doesn't really sound...
Well, maybe that statement was just applying to the non-Jews. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe these were prominent people. Maybe they had access to Jewish women. Maybe in this case, maybe you could see why the force.
But it actually also may very well apply to an early sect of Christianity.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, where Josephus is being understanding about worshiping a man as God.
Oh, I see.
Right, and breaking away from the central system. It doesn't seem like something Josephus would say, is what most historians say about this line. And these men who had fled to us for protection ought not to be so treated as to repent of their coming here. And when I had pacified the multitude, I provided for the men that were come to us whatever they wanted, according to their usual way of living, and what in great plenty also. So it's a little unclear what we're talking about here. Is he talking about food and lodging or something more? It's a little unclear. Now King Agrippa sent an army to make themselves masters of the citadel of Gamala. Moving forward. Okay, where is Gamala? Gamala... hang on a second. Gamala is actually a little bit further... It's quite a move. Hold on.
I think it's north.
What?
I think it's north.
Yeah, it is.
Gamal? Did you say?
No.
Gamal's in Golan.
Yeah.
Did you say Gamal?
No, not Gamala. Give me 1 second. You saw it earlier.
Do you know every little town in Israel?
Here it is.
No, something.
Gamala
Gamla.
is here.
In
So remember where we left off was Sepphoris and Batalmas here, and this is where Gamala is, right?
So what's the goal?
It's well, no, it's a little bit
It is
south.
right up. No, it's right opposite
Right.
here. It's still Golan.
Yeah, but it's sort of the middle south of, yeah, right. Okay, so that's where it is. All right.
It was a big battle.
So King Agrippa sent an army to make themselves masters of the citadel of Gamala. Gamala had a fort. It was really a fortress environment. And over it, a Roman whose name was Equus Modius. But the forces that were sent were not enough to encompass the citadel quite around. They weren't able to take the citadel, but they lay before it in open places and besieged it. And when Ebutius the Decorian is a leader of the cavalry. He's the first of the horsemen, so to speak, in the cavalry, who was entrusted with the government of the Great Plain, heard that I was there in a village situated in the confines of the Galilee, and was distant from him 60 furlongs. Furlong, I now know, is roughly 200 meters. Right? It's like 2 soccer fields. Right? So he was, distant 60 furlongs. So it's quite a distance. He took 100 horsemen that were with him by night, and a certain number of footmen, about 200, and brought the inhabitants to the city of Gibeah. Gibeah, so he came from there, crossed from Gamala, which was here, to Gibeah, which is here, overnight. It was a night ride, right? Okay. And brought the inhabitants of Gibeah along with him as reinforcements, and marched in the night and came to the village where I was staying. Upon this I pitched my camp near him, which had a great number of forces in it. So he had a lot of forces, and the guy attacking him did, right? But Ebutius tried to draw us down onto the plain, as greatly depending upon... You can see this, actually, if you're ever in Sfat. There are very high hills, and then when you look down, there's a beautiful plain that separates... What does it separate? It separates today... What? No.
The Jezreel Valley.
Yeah, yes, you're right, the Jezreel Valley. That's right. So Ebutius wanted to draw him down into the valley, right, where his horses would be effective. And so he tried to draw us down into the plain, as greatly depending upon horsemen. But we would not come down, for when I was satisfied with the advantage that his cavalry would have if we came down into the plain, while we were all footmen, I resolved to join battle with the enemy where I was. So if you're driving, I don't know if anybody's ever made this drive, but if you drive from, say, Tiberias to Ephrat, there's a long flat period, and then you start going to Tzfat. What did I say? To Tzfat, sorry. There's a long flat period as you're leaving the Jezreel Valley, and then it's very, very hilly and quite dangerous driving, actually, as you're moving out into the mountainous area. Well, this is a tremendous disadvantage for cavalry, because it's a very steep climb and hard on horses. So what Josephus is saying was he wanted me to come and attack him, right? Go down into the valley and attack him, where his horsemen would have cut us to pieces. But I'm a smart tactician. I had the high ground, right? And I said, you want me? Come up here with your horses and get me. Right, and I had a tremendous advantage because his horses were at an angle like this, constantly climbing, right, and it was much harder for them. Right? So he says that, now Abdias and his party made a courageous opposition for some time, but when he saw that his cavalry were useless to him in that place, he retired back to the city of Gibeah, having lost 3 of his men in the fight. So I followed him directly with 2,000 armed men, and when I was in the city of Basara and lay in the confines of Ptolemais, he's pushed him all the way back to the Mediterranean, it seems. That lay in the confines of Ptolemais, but 20 furlongs from Gibeah, where Abdias abode, I placed my armed men on the outside of the village, and gave orders that they should guard the passes with great care, and that the enemy might not disturb us until we should have carried off what? The grain, a great quantity of which lay there. He's stealing the grain from the city at this point, right? So he's saying, keep the Romans away, right, while we empty the grain from the city, right? He never misses an opportunity to, get himself some supplies. That grain belonged to Bernice, the queen of the city, and had been gathered out of the neighboring villages. So I loaded my camels and donkeys, a great number of which I had brought along with me, and I sent the grain to the Galilee. When I had done this...
Bernice?
What?
What about Bernice?
What about
Well, she's a queen of the village. What does it mean?
And she's now a hungry queen of the village.
Didn't she,
It's unclear which side she was
she
on.
married to Agrippa or something?
Oh, it doesn't say.
Doesn't say?
It doesn't say. I don't think so.
No, okay, so.
Maybe every village had a queen, so it was not.
Well, they were city-states, very much, When I had done this, I offered Abdias battle. Okay, so now I've got the grain, right? Abdias is between me and Ptolemais. Now remember, although he's not mentioning this, Ptolemais is where Jesus and the robbers came from. So it may be right now that Abdias has Josephus' forces both in front of him and behind him, if he can depend on Jesus. But when he would not accept the offer of battle, for he was terrified at our readiness and our courage, I altered my route and marched towards Neapolitus, because I had heard that the country about Tiberias was laid waste by him. Neapolitanus was a centurion. He was a leader of ground troops. He would later be promoted to tribune, which was a governor's position. And so you can see the Romans are moving from place to place, attacking cities, and it seems like Josephus is chasing them where he can. He really isn't engaged in the war already, it seems clear. Neapolitus was a captain of a troop, a centurion. As well, he had cavalry with him, and had custody of Scythopolis, entrusted to his care by the enemy. Scythopolis, we've talked about before, was a fairly large city, which was here in the middle of the Kinneret, right? Sort of in this area here, right? So all of this is going on in a very small area, the Galilee, and it's like there's fires of war breaking out in different places, right? When I had hindered him from doing any further mischief in Tiberias, I set myself to make provisions for the affairs of the Galilee. Meaning, I'm preparing now for the total defense of the Galilee, and I'm really presenting myself as the authority in the Galilee. I've fought the Romans in a couple of places. I represent Jerusalem in the Galilee. I have almost a governor's position, right? And now that I've chased them in a number of different places, I want to set up shop, my authority, right? But when John, remember John, his nemesis, right? Mm-hmm. But when John, the son of Levi, who, as we before told you, was abode in Gascala. Gascala is north of all of this. Up here, right? This is all happening down here. He's gone up here to a walled city that he's named for, John of Gascala, right? But when John, the son of Levi, as we told you before, was in the abode of Gascala, was informed of how all these things had succeeded to my mind, and that I was much in favor of those that were under me, as also that the enemy were greatly afraid of me, he was not pleased with it, as thinking that my prosperity tended to his ruin. So John sees ruin, right? This is the idea of zero-sum game. Wherever Josephus is up, John is down. When John is up, Josephus is down, right? They're both Jews. They're both, in principle, against the Romans, right? But they seem to be as much against each other, and maybe more so than they are against the Romans themselves. And so rather than celebrating Josephus' success, whatever that success is, John seems to be jealous, right? So he took up a bitter envy and hostility against me, and hoping that if he could inflame those that were under me to hate me, he should put an end to the prosperity I was in. And he tried to persuade the inhabitants of Tiberias and Sepphoris, and for those of Gabara, he supposed they would also of the same mind with the others, which were the greatest cities in the Galilee, to revolt from their subjugation to me, and to be of his party, and told them that he would command them better than I did. That's pretty clear, right? He was spreading the word among Josephus' people. I can do a better job than Josephus can. Come to me. Be loyal to me. As for the people of Sepphoris, who belonged to neither of us, right? They were loyal to the Romans, right? Because they had chosen to be in subjection, subjected to the Romans. They did not comply with his proposal. And for those of Tiberias, they did not indeed so comply as to make a revolt from under me, but they agreed to be his friends, while the inhabitants of Gabara did go over to John. So there's three cities we're talking about, right? One of them never supported either side, stayed with the Romans, right? One of them said, we're staying with you, Josephus, but by the way, we're not going to create an enemy of John. We'll stay friendly with him, but we're loyal to you. And the third, the smaller city, went over to John.
He took their grain, isn't it?
Of Gabara? No, different city.
Whose grain he took?
Basara, Bernice. Right? Well, the inhabitants of Gabara did go over to John. Simon persuaded them so to do so. Simon was one of the people who came with Josephus north originally. Persuaded them, one who is both the principal man in the city and a particular friend and companion of John's. It is true these did not openly admit making of a revolt, because they were in great fear of the Galileans. The Galileans are his troops, right? And had frequent experience of the goodwill they bore me. Yet they privately watched for a proper opportunity to lay snares for me, and indeed I thereby came into the greatest danger on the occasion of the following. They laid snares, traps, for him. There were some bold young men in the village of Darita, which is it's a very small village, but it's near Sepphoris, who observed that the wife of Ptolemy, the king procurator, this is a Ptolemy who I think is one of the leaders of Syria, was to journey over the great plain with a mighty attendance and with some horsemen that followed as a guard to them. So the wife of really the ruler of, I think it's Syria, there were Ptolemies both in Egypt and in Syria at the time, was planning to make a trip. And the spies of the Jews knew about the trip, knew what her route was, knew what she was carrying with her, which was a great deal of wealth, right? And knew what the troops would be with her, right? And with some horsemen followed as a guard to them. And this out of the country that was subject to the king and the queen into the jurisdiction of the Romans, right? So they were going from Syria, I think, through the north and then back into Roman hands. So these guys fell upon them on a sudden and obliged the wife of Ptolemy to flee and plundered all the carriages. They also came to me at Tariche. I don't know if you remember, Tariche is where he fled when he was getting out of the Galilee. When he crossed the... it's on the sea here, right? This is Tariche. Last week, when he escaped out of the city and jumped onto the boat, he went to Tariche, right? So they came to me in Tariche with 4 mule loads of garments and other furniture, and the weight of the silver that they had brought was not small, and there were 500 pieces of gold also. So it was a very successful bank robbery, so to speak, or railroad train robbery. I had in mind to preserve these spoils for Ptolemy. So he's saying this was not consistent with what my plans were. You're going to upset the Ptolemies, we're going to have a big problem. We got the Romans to deal with, right? You want to deal with the Ptolemies as well? Not a good idea. So he said, I had in mind to preserve these spoils for the Ptolemy, who was my countryman. And it is prohibited by our laws even to plunder our enemies. So I said to those that brought these spoils, these young men, that they ought to be kept in order to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem with them. And when they came to be sold. So he's saying, I'll hold on to the wealth, right, and use this money to build the fortifications of Jerusalem. It's not for you to enjoy for yourselves. But the young men took it very ill, and they did not receive a part of the spoils for themselves, as they expected to have done. So they went among the villages in the neighborhood of Tiberias and told the people that I was going to betray their country to the Romans, and that I used the deceitful language to them when I said that what had been thus gotten by plundering should be kept for the rebuilding of the walls of the city of Jerusalem. Although I had resolved to restore the spoils again to the former owner. They were right, the young men. He wasn't going to use it to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And indeed, they were herein not mistaken as to my intentions. For when I had gotten clear of them, I sent for 2 of the principal men, Dacian and Janius, the sons of Levi, persons that were among the chief friends of the king, and commanded them to take the goods that had been plundered and to send it to him. Right? Get it to Agrippa. Agrippa will get it back to the Ptolemies. Everything will be smoothed over. And I threatened that I would order them to be put to death by way of punishment if they revealed my command to any other person. So he's playing a very interesting game in the middle of all of these stresses that exist. You know, the Middle East hasn't changed so much. You know, who do you support in this?
I think that he's a little bit smarter than everybody else, and he could manipulate people. He understood how to, a master manipulator in a way. Like, he...
Certainly that's how he portrays himself. That's pretty clear. Right? Now, when all the Galilee was filled with the rumor that their country was about to be betrayed by me to the Romans, and when all the men were stirred against me and ready to bring me to punishment, the inhabitants of Tariche did also themselves suppose that what the young men said was true. It was true. and persuaded my guards, the armed men, to leave me when I was asleep, and to come presently to the hippodrome. The hippodrome was the headquarters, in order there to take counsel against me, their commander. Right? So the guards were told, go take a walk, take a break. Right? We're going to deal with Josephus because Josephus is going to betray us all to the Romans. Right? Wherever he goes, he seems people are questioning, what his intentions are. And when they had prevailed with them, they were gotten together. They found there a great company assembled already, who all joined in the clamor to bring the man who was so wicked to them as to betray them to his due punishment. He's talking about himself. And it was Jesus, the son of Saphias, who mainly set them on. He was a ruler in Tiberias, a wicked man, and naturally disposed to make disturbances in the matters of consequence. He was a rebellious person, indeed, and a revolutionary more than anyone else. He then took the laws of Moses into his hands and came into the midst of the people and said, O my fellow citizens, if you are not disposed to hate Josephus on your own account, have regard, however, to these laws of your country, which your commander-in-chief is going to betray. Hate him, therefore, on both these accounts, and bring the man who has acted thus insolently to his deserved punishment. Now, Josephus is actually schluffing at this point. We don't really know how he knows about all this, but it seems all this is gathering against him, and he's resting in the hippodrome. Right? When he had said this, and the multitude had openly applauded him for what he had said, he took some of the armed men and hurried to the house in which I lodged, as if he would kill me immediately, while I was wholly insensible of all until this disturbance happened, and by reason of the pains that I had been taking, was fallen fast asleep. I've been working so hard for the people that I just lay down and I was sound asleep. But Simon, who was entrusted with the care of my body, and was the only person that stayed with me, saw the violent incursion the citizens made upon me, and awakened me, and told me of the danger I was in, and desired me to let him kill me.
Oh.
Simon, that's actually a game, right? What is that? Simon said, they're going to do terrible things to you. Let me do you a favor. I'll kill you like a soldier now,
without
right?
any suffering.
Then have you be disgraced, and your body parts strewn around, right? Told me the danger I was in, and desired me to let him kill me, that I might die bravely like a general before my enemies came in and forced me to kill myself, or killed me themselves. Thus did he say to me, but I committed the care of my life to God and hurried out to the multitude. Right? So, what did he do? Right? He said, Simon, I appreciate the offer. Very kind of you, but I'm going to put myself in the hands of God, and I'm going out to face the multitude myself. Accordingly, I put on a black garment and hung my sword at my neck, and went by such a different way to the hippodrome, wherein I thought none of my adversaries would meet me. So I appeared among them suddenly, and I fell down flat on the earth and went to the ground with my tears. And then I seemed to them all an object of compassion. And when I perceived the change that was made in the multitude, I tried to divide their opinion before the armed men should return to my house. Return from my house. So the armed men are over at his house. He sneaks out. He goes to another area where there's a gathering of the crowd that the armed men had left, right? And he makes his appeal. He throws himself on the ground. This is a traditional Jewish thing. Moses is doing it all the time in the Torah. Right? Mm-hmm. He's hanging a sword around his neck, and he throws himself on the ground, and the people, not the lynch mob itself that's gone to his house, the rest of the people seem to feel some compassion. So maybe he's divided the townspeople between those who are violent and those who are kind of feeling sorry for him at this point, right? That's his goal, right? So I granted them that I had been as wicked as they supposed me to be, but still I entreated them to let me first inform them for what was the use that I had kept the money which arose from the plunder, and then they could kill me if they pleased. And after the multitude ordered me to speak, the armed men came upon me, and when they saw me, they ran to kill me. But when the multitude directed them to hold their hands, they complied, and expected that as soon as I should admit to them that I kept the money for the king, it would be looked upon as a confession of my treason, and they would then be allowed to kill me. So everybody, there's a very dramatic picture he's painting here, right? The armed men come back, they see him, on a soapbox or whatever, right? And they want to go for him and finish the job. The people say, let's give him a fair trial and then we'll hang him.
They're acting as they stand.
Right. You can't kill him until we heard his piece, right? And the armed men understand he's actually going to now confess. And after his confession, we get to kill him. So why should we upset the townsfolk? Right? We'll let him confess and then we'll kill him. Right? When therefore silence was made about the whole multitude, I spoke thus to them, O my countrymen, I do not refuse to die, if justice so requires. However, I am desirous to tell you the truth of this matter before I die. He's about 31 years old at this point. Mm-hmm. I know that the city of yours, Tariche, was a city of great hospitality, and filled with abundance of such men as have left their own countries, and are come here to be partakers of your fortune. As is, you've opened your gate to strangers. Whatever it be, I had a mind to build walls about it, out of this money. I wasn't really going to use the money to build the walls of Jerusalem. I love your city so much that my intention was not to use the money for the people of Jerusalem, but actually, friends, Romans, and countrymen, it was to build your walls here in Tariche. That's what I held the money for. I had in mind to build the walls about it, out of the money, for which you are so angry with me, while yet it was to be expended in the building your own walls. Upon my saying this, the people of Tariche and the strangers cried out that they gave me thanks, and they desired me to be of good courage. Although the Galileans and the people of Tiberias continued to rage against me, insomuch as they arose a disturbance among them, while some threatened to kill me, and some directed me not to regard them. But when I promised them that I would build them walls, and that, like Tiberias and other cities, wanted them, they gave credit to what I had promised, and returned home. So I escaped the danger beyond all my hopes, and returned to my own house, accompanied with my friends, and 20 armed men also. Nice outcome. Mm-hmm. He talked his way out of this one, right? Mm-hmm. I kept the gold, not for Jerusalem, for you personally.
That's why he says.
Now, if you want to kill me, you can. But now you know the truth, and you'll have to decide for yourself. However, these robbers and other authors of this disturbance, who were afraid on their own account, lest I should punish them for what they had done, took 600 armed men and came to the house where I was staying in order to set it on fire. When this, their insult, was told to me, I thought it indecent for me to run away, and I resolved to expose myself to the danger and to act with some boldness. So I gave the order to shut the doors, and went up into the upper room, and desired that they would send in some of their men to receive the money from the spoils. Right? You don't believe me? Come and take the money yourself. Right? For I told them that they would have no occasion to be angry with me. And when they had sent in one of their boldest, one of their leaders, right?
Donald Trump.
One of the, what?
Reminds me of Donald Trump.
Boldest of them, I had him whipped severely,
Upstairs.
and I commanded that one of his hands should be cut off and hung around his neck. All right, so in summary, they send in their strongest, boldest warrior to collect the gold, right? They come up to Josephus' room. Josephus has his 20 guards with him. They hold the guy, they beat him severely, whip him and beat him severely, right? Then they cut off his hand.
The gold collector, right?
The enemy, and the leader of the enemy's outside, right? They tie a rope around his hand and put the rope around his neck, right? So his hand is hanging from the rope around his neck, and they send him back to the guys outside.
People who planning to burn the house.
People who planning to burn the house, right?
They'll stop. It's very strange. No, what is the reaction of 600
Okay.
people outside the
And in this case, it was put out to those who sent him. At which procedure of mine, they were greatly frightened, and they were afraid that they should themselves be served in like manner, if they stayed there. For they supposed that I had in the house more armed men than they had themselves. So they more than 600. So they ran away immediately, while I, by the use of this stratagem, escaped this their second treacherous design against me.
They struck such a fear in them that they just were probably
It's
horrified. Was not taking a chance just in case, right?
So I think we should hold here, as Josephus has had one more narrow escape, and now we're beginning to see Josephus, not the sweet talker, but he will resort to whatever is required
Cruel.
to succeed. And in this case, it's pure terror. He didn't just kill the guy; he left the guy alive. You can imagine.
It did worse to him.
You can imagine the scene of the guy stumbling out of the thing, right?
Eye for an eye.
Seriously?
Eye for a hand.
Eye for a tooth and for a hand, right?
What?
Like
Why
ISIS.
it was from Israel? He burned the Beit Mikdash?
Okay,
Look what
get
they
up,
did to
Masha.
Josephus.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I mean, let's keep the one thing to keep in mind, which Guy is saying here, is that we just came through Tisha B'Av, and we're reminded at Tisha B'Av that because somebody was embarrassed at a dinner at a simcha, that there was hatred for no reason, and that was the reason for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Well, you can see where a bad simcha situation leads to. This is the Romans are not involved in this at all.
Yeah, there's no.
This is all within the community of Israel at this point. Let this be a lesson for us.
Amen.